episode of the Beirut Banyan, and we're joined today by Zeina Saab Munir Nabti. Zeina is a founder of the Nawaya Network and a co-founder of SE Factory, committing herself to empowering marginalized youth throughout Lebanon. And Munir is a co-founder of AltCity and Pitchworthy, NGOs focusing on technology, entrepreneurial thinking, and a commitment to reducing inequality throughout the country. Their respective NGOs' websites are linked in the details box below. And both Zeina and Munir are friends. I've known them for years now. I knew them when they were students at AUB. I knew them before they knew each other. And I was lucky. I knew them as their love story began. Their optimism, their passion, I wanted to hear their thoughts together on their shared determination to keep going despite the odds. And our conversation took place at Beirut Digital District, which is in Khand al-Ghami. And it's just beneath the ring, beneath the Fuad Shahab Bridge, where we saw two things happening over the past 2 weeks. For the most part, festivities, peaceful protesting, a lot of politics, a lot of debates, and genuine euphoria. And unfortunately, we saw episodes of violence, of riots, of tents being burned to the ground, images that were frightening, and images that did not overwhelm the majority of protesters, because within hours, everything went back to normal. This, of course, coincided with the Prime Minister's resignation, but the conversation's location, I think, is important because it actually exposes two things. It exposes the positivity and the optimism that is shared among Zeina and Munir. It also exposes the brink of chaos and violence Lebanon is too familiar with, and it's a fragile balance that we've lived through, not just through the civil war, but in the post-war years. Both Zeina and Munir have committed themselves to living in Lebanon and taking advantage of what's happening now and reflecting on the moment of unity Lebanon is going through. Before we get to Zeina and Munir, if you're enjoying these episodes, please consider a contribution through Patreon. The link is in the details box. Any donation is appreciated. For episode 30 of the Beirut Banyan, I'm Rani Shatah with Zeina Saab and Munir Nabti.
This moment, expecting it to have been, to have happened during the trash crisis. I thought that the trash crisis was going to be the thing that unites everybody and brings everybody out on the streets for a sustained amount of time, because trash hits everybody. Christian, Muslim, well-to-do, low income, people in the north, the south, the mountains. This touches everybody alike. And this, I thought, would be like the neutral element that really unites the country and tells everybody to just completely rise up and say, no more, we are fed up. It did not happen, unfortunately. Before all of this happened, I was always saying that it was going to be something economical. If Lebanon needs to implode, if the currency needs to devalue, if more unemployment needs to happen, if more pensions are wiped out, if it reaches that catastrophic level, I felt that this was going to be the thing that brings people out on the streets. Luckily, we didn't have to reach that level. It actually happened a little bit sooner. I hope we're not too late, but yes, it's so different this time around because it is financial. It hits everybody in a more direct way than the trash crisis did. Right. I hope it doesn't actually happen, this deterioration, economic deterioration that everybody's talking about. I hope we're able to stop it before it actually manifests itself nationwide and hits everybody. But it needed to be something that severe to get people to wake up and realize if we don't do something, we're all headed towards the same unfortunate path.
So it's the unique shared economic pain that allowed something like this to happen. The last time we saw each other was 3 or 4 days before the Shuf fires began, less than a week before the revolt started. And we had a sort of a friendly exchange of pessimism, that we thought that it might already be too late, but there was that glimmer of hope. And you think that this protest, in a way, we're lucky that it happened now, before the ultimate collapse.
I mean, it is all economical, it's all financial, it's something that hits everybody completely the same way.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we're realizing now that all the factors that have divided Lebanese over the past several decades have only been tools that the leaders of Lebanon have been using to fragment us and to divide us, and to have us completely be reliant on them. And I think that's collapsing now.
Because of this protest.
Yeah, because we're realizing that they are not actually seeking to protect us. They're doing this for their own benefit. It's absolutely bizarre to me to see how low-income people who have really nothing going for them, they're not going to the best schools and universities, they're not finding the proper jobs, they're in despair, and yet they are able to completely continue to follow their own leaders who are so wealthy because of exploiting the system. It's just, this is what they've been able to brainwash us with, to make us feel that they are protecting us, our community, our sect, and this is what has taken precedence over our own dignity, our own well-being, our own national well-being.
So in a way,
this is collapsing.
Right.
Now.
So the fact that it happened sooner than the proper crash is giving us a last chance, because we're overcoming things that we don't usually overcome. Does it share sentiment?
What I've been feeling for many years here, and I moved back here 15 years ago from California, is that we very often have strengths that overlap with our weaknesses. We have had such incredible creativity, open-mindedness, discussions, people coming together the last several days, the last 2 weeks. It has been so beautiful, and we've had samples of that, glimmers of that, for many years. You know, the amount of art galleries and music and bands and art and so much stuff, we've had that, but our system hasn't supported it. So it's been very constrained. But we have so much of that we can build on if we appreciate that what we have is a great start. It's very far from where we need to go, but it's a great start to build on. And I think this will help us in terms of the challenges that I think most countries around the world will face. If we can figure out how to leverage our foundation to grow on, it'll be incredible. If we think that we're fine where we are, then we're going to be in very big trouble. The same kind of thing in the startup ecosystem where I've been working for the last 12 years is there are many people who I think who are too comfortable with where it's at, thinking that we have a decent ecosystem, even in Beirut. But in my mind, it's so early, it's so nascent, it's fantastic to build on, but we're so far from where we need to be, even in the startup ecosystem.
Yeah. I'm going to step back for a moment. We'll get into all of this because there's a lot of things here that I think it's an equal measure, positive and negative expectations to come. But let's go back in time, 15 years ago, when we first met each other. We met each other, I think, in the months after the March 14 movement. So fall of 2005 and then 2006, where we experienced the summer war. But back then, despite there was violence, we had a summer war, where there were people that lost their lives and there were assassinations taking place repeatedly. We had a sit-in in downtown that paralyzed the city for almost 2 years. There was still positive energy. And I think, I'm going to speak at least on my behalf, the bad did not outweigh the good in that stretch. There was still a sort of a determination that we can overcome this and we'll have a better country. It may take a few years, but we'll get there. Fast forward 15 years later, we're in the middle of it, but we see it beginning to die down, the demonstrations the last 2 weeks. Do you retain that kind of optimism? Do you still have that same determination, or has it faded a bit?
I'm naturally an optimistic person. I choose to believe that everything happens for a reason, even like in the midst of the fires that were happening. I just couldn't believe that on top of everything else, we had the fires, as if we needed that. It's like adding insult to injury. I'm like, this is what's going to get people out on the streets. It didn't. And then, lo and behold, it served its purpose because the WhatsApp issue boiled over, you know? So I always try to think that there's always somehow a purpose to everything. What we're seeing now is very different. And we're saying that we were in a coma and we finally woke up, and I really don't think that everyone will continue to vote the way they've been voting traditionally. Sure, there's a large segment of the population that will, but there's a large segment that will not. And I like to group people in the voters or non-voters in different groups, and one of the main ones is the people who have been completely disillusioned and who have chosen not to vote in past elections because they don't have trust in anyone, in any system. Even in new faces, they're skeptical. Are these people going to become corrupt? And so they choose to not vote and not make that difference.
So in a way, you're allowing for more hope this time around.
I feel that a percentage of this population that chose to stay home in past elections will finally choose to go and vote to try to make that change. And what's happening now, it's so beautiful. Sure, the protests physically have died down, but it's still on our minds every single day. And we're always thinking, how can we contribute? How can we keep this going? We don't want this to die. It's still the beginning, and we understand that. We're not naive, and we understand that there are major forces at play that are so against us. So what we need to do is to really find a united stance somehow and agree that we're going to keep going, we're going to keep fighting for this, because we've already achieved something significant, but the road is long. So I really think if we're able to capitalize on all the initiatives that have been formed here, what is it that's being formed right now, and the different discussions that are being held, the ideas that are being exchanged, the networks that are being created, the organizations that are being formed, what's being born here, you don't know what that will lead to in a few years' time. We're not saying change is going to happen overnight, but it will happen. I take a look at 2011, the Take Back Parliament movement. This was during the Arab Spring, and it kind of hit Lebanon at some point, and we were out on the streets demanding a secular state. It fizzled out, fine, it wasn't the time, but it was the start of something. 4 years later, 2015, the trash crisis. Movements came up, you know, and others. This sparked something. And then Beirut Banyan in 2016, and now this. You know, this is all leading to something. We're all putting the pieces of the puzzle together to create that path to something significant that's going to happen for the future of Lebanon. But we're not expecting it to happen overnight.
In your opinion, the burden goes back to elections, that it's a matter of getting rid of the ruling parties that have more or less governed Lebanon for at least the better half of the past 50 years. You're talking about that is the road ahead, in your opinion.
I think Lebanon is too fragile of a state to have change come through more violent ways. I mean, we saw in different parts of the Arab world, violence did not serve a good purpose at all. And I would never want that to happen to Lebanon. I recognize the challenges, and that's why I feel it's so beautiful, the fact that these protests have been really largely peaceful. Thankfully, my heart goes out to the people who passed away, but it's not that many, you know? And so I hope we can stay along that path, but I really think pressure needs to come on a political level, on one hand, and second, awareness. Education, who is electing these people who have been in power for the past several decades? They are people who are electing them. Who are they? A lot of them are out on the streets with us.
So you see through the shared economic pain that there is now a unique potential for political change. That those attempts in the last 15 years were not there because
it wasn't ripe enough. I feel it's ripe.
So I think the process is going to take longer than a lot of people thought at some of the protests. I mean, I remember after just 3 or 4 days of the protests, many people were wondering why the government hadn't fallen yet, why they hadn't met our demands, and met the demands of the people. And I had had a sense that this was going to be much longer, and that a lot of the change that people thought would take a week or 2 weeks or even 3 weeks actually will take 2 or 3 months, and actually will take a year or two until the next elections, and until hopefully the next elections, because it might be the next 1 or 2 elections as things evolve. There's so many unknowns in that, and I think that I was surprised and quite scared by what happened yesterday in downtown Beirut.
Were you guys?
Even though
where were you when the protests became
turned into riots?
Almost a war zone yesterday. It was a war zone.
We were both near downtown.
I was
We were
heading
both downtown.
towards the confrontation, and I saw 200-300 of the young men.
But you saw it yourself.
Yeah, and then I ran away.
Where were you, man?
I was also downtown.
Yeah.
And also saw it, and and one of the things that I thought was really, it was very scary, just because in this kind of context, it's not a time when you can have discussions with people about issues and economic rights, and how a lot of people have been very deprived in this country for a long time. Yeah. But this was some of the stuff that came out in discussions after, and people saying, both on TV and people we spoke with, that people are not angry at those people who were going and bashing the tents downtown. There really was this sense that we are Lebanese and they are Lebanese, and we have all been struggling, and we've all been struggling and trying to survive in these very difficult circumstances, and the system pushed us in different directions. But how can we then follow on with some of the discussions and some of our efforts as one community, as one country, to move towards the sense that even when we disagree about these different issues, we can respect each other, we can have conversations, we can think about how we can move forwards as a country, even when we have some of these deep disagreements. And I think it's some of these deeper issues that we have to think about, that is not downtown. Yeah. It's not in the different cities at the protests. It's not dealing with the change of government. It's dealing with how we deal with some of these aspects in our education system, in our culture, in our society. How do we interact with people? In my mind, we talk about how khubz wa milh, and we invite people over for coffee and all of this stuff, which is totally true. But at the same time, then we get in our cars and we are constantly disrespecting our fellow Lebanese on a regular basis through cutting in front and trying to do these shortcuts. It's similar when we go to the airport, or when there's these other lines or whatever, constantly trying to feel like, out of desperation, we have to try to grab or take any little advantage we can, because the system has made people so frustrated and so desperate. How can we, in this culture, change this mindset of, no, I don't want to cut in front of you in the car. Please go ahead. Please. And if someone is frustrated, realize that they've probably had a bad day. And not retaliate, not raise our voice, not honk the horn, but realize that everyone is really trying through difficult times, and let's be more patient and supportive with each other.
Do you think that where we are as maybe graduates of AUB, and it's worth noting you guys are not the same confession, you have a civil marriage. I got a civil marriage, but I got stuck with the same confession. Regardless, I stuck to the civil marriage. Do you think that a bit of the psychological history, whatever it is, this tendency to naturally lean back and fall back into the old ways, this power sharing formula that made Lebanon what it is, and might be Lebanon's biggest curse, do you see that this might be the beginning of what may end up being a secular regime for Lebanon, or is that still too distant and Lebanon cannot survive with a secular system? And this is a subjective opinion.
I think honestly the seeds have been planted for that, because before these protests happened, Lebanon was largely segregated. People were very much within their own bubbles, save for a few areas around the country where there's real integration.
Yeah.
But largely, neighborhoods and communities are one color
Yeah.
and homogeneous. What we witnessed in downtown is remarkable
Yeah.
because we reclaimed public space. And I'm sure
Physically.
you you probably experienced what we saw.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so beautiful to see people from different backgrounds, very, very different backgrounds, sharing the same street,
Yes.
enjoying the same music and the food and the poetry and the art and the discussions. It was so incredible.
Yeah.
People that we normally would not meet or have discussions with or become friends with because we are so isolated in our own bubbles now are our friends.
It's also very important to note here, it
Yeah.
can go within a few hours. It's almost as
Yes.
if nothing happened.
Incredible.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
incredible what we witnessed.
Yeah.
If we can create a country where there's social cohesiveness, where people naturally mix and mingle. They closed off Hajj Beirut for using the excuse that it's because it's like Shiyeh and ma ba'rif which neighborhoods come together. They're worried about this public space becoming a space for sectarian battles. We proved them wrong.
Yeah.
They're keeping us apart for a certain reason, but when we come together, we start to experience things together and understand there's no more secondary prejudice or secondary stereotypes where we hear about the other. We actually experience the other in front of us, and we start to form our own impressions of each other, and that's where the barriers start to be broken down. This is how change happens.
Those are real cracks in the system.
Absolutely.
What about you, Mani?
Look, I agree with much of that, and there is a lot of beauty in people coming together and realizing that we have way more similarities than differences. And how can we really celebrate and embrace and enhance the things that bring us together while we work on addressing and learning and also embracing the differences. That's okay. Diversity is also a beautiful thing. I think we need to get to the point of not having it feel like a problem that we have 19 sects, but that we 18 sects.
You've been on the tour.
Twice. Whatever.
Give it to
Okay.
him.
Fine. That it's not an issue that we have so many sects, but that we actually, it's not a problem, sorry, it's an opportunity. It's beautiful.
I agree.
Let's celebrate these different aspects and communities and celebrations and traditions. It's fantastic. I think at the same time, though, it's fine to be included in this conversation. There are situations around the world, I'm a firm believer in democracy, and there are aspects, there are different forms and flavors of democracy around the world. And places that have a lot of diversity do often have elements that help to prevent the fear of or the actual sort of, we call it the tyranny of the majority. Now, in the US, there is the aspect of the states and how the states have representation in the Senate and how the states are represented in the Electoral College. This is to prevent the smaller states that do have some differences of culture and tradition, etc., from getting totally dominated by the big states.
Yes.
There are also examples in Europe.
Yeah.
In Belgium, they have these sorts of power-sharing arrangement.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I actually don't have any problem of keeping some aspect of this sort of power-sharing arrangement to help all Lebanese. There is no majority group, but there are definitely much bigger and much smaller groups.
So
can we have some elements
Yeah.
that help the smaller groups, first of all, maintain the representation and help them feel safe? Like there will never be an issue. They don't even have to worry about an aspect of tyranny of the majority because it can't happen. Now, there are some different discussions around of the aspect of the putting the presidency in the top positions in this idea of mdawara, of rotation, or there are these aspects of whether there should be a separate Senate. In my mind right now, a lot of the calls for the government are to have a smaller government, not a bigger government. So I have this hesitancy about adding a whole new layer for a small country to have this whole new branch of more people who are getting those salaries and getting those those things. So I don't think we necessarily need to go to that. I am an advocate of having things of something like having the president be elected by the people and be of any sect. and then have some aspect of power sharing then of the other positions that rotates based on who the president can be.
Yeah.
But I think every Lebanese person should, every kid, I see this in the eyes of kids, every Lebanese kid should be able to aspire to serve their country in that top post of being president of the country.
Yes.
And at the same time, for the older people, is us as a nation should be able to look for the best people of the country, regardless of sect, to lead the country. And at the same time, figure out some mechanism of power sharing to make sure that that all groups, that many groups are represented.
Do you see that happening though? And I ask you because there's now that momentum is there for something else, something new. Do you see it? Do you see a transition possible towards something like that? Because these are all great ideas. I spoke to Shibli Malak. He was on TV in the middle of the uprising saying, screw confessionalism, let's put a gender quota. 50-50, not Christian, Muslim, men, women. Start over. These are perhaps a bit eccentric for Lebanon, but it seems, that sounds like a great idea. And what you're saying also sounds like a great idea. Do you see that on the horizon?
I think having a gender quota in the parliament is difficult just because there's so many layers already. If we're going to have some sort of allocation by districts and then allocation by sect, having another one is just complicated. For the cabinet, for the council of ministers, 100%. At least 40%, or we could just say flat out 50% women. I think that should be without a doubt some way to go.
But is
now,
in terms of momentum to get there?
In terms of, I have a feeling that I think that there are a lot more people across the country of all sects and groups and ages and financial backgrounds, etc., who, if they were given the opportunity of choosing between different candidates for a post at a sort of national level, I think that even going back a few years, but definitely now, the majority of them would choose based on who they think would be the best for the country and not who happens to be their own sect. Now, in terms of, I think that a lot of people are afraid of this aspect of tyranny of a majority, but if there were protections for that, if we say, no, that's protected, don't worry about that, that's happening. Now, who can we choose of the best one or best, couple people, or there's not national vote, or and there can't really be national vote for all of the ministries, et cetera, but people are much more interested in seeing qualified people who can take the country in a productive, positive direction, rather than someone who happens to be their own sect.
But this is where it's so essential for the government to really be representative of the people, and for the people from these different communities to feel that there is a government that will treat them equally. Because historically in Lebanon, this is why confessionalism has been so powerful, because our leaders were able to exploit that fear. Now, if we have a strong state and a strong leadership where we believe that the leadership is actually intent on serving everybody equally, that's where nationalism will become strengthened and confessionalism will naturally become weakened. But nobody has enough trust right now, because of what we've been through in this country historically, to feel that that a leadership that's not from their own sect actually can be just with them.
Yeah.
And, so this is what we need to work on.
So it's, in a sense, and I know it's really premature to know what will happen as a result the last 2 weeks. Revolutions usually take days. A proper revolution, meaning toppling a regime and putting in something else. It should be, sometimes if you're really lucky, a matter of hours. And I'm going all the way here.
I don't know which way. I don't know which ones took hours, let alone days.
Well, I'll give you a good example. 30 years ago, Ta'if was signed. And that's, I think, symbolically at least, that's what people are protesting against. The Ta'if order, the post-war order. 30 years ago, the Berlin Wall fell. And the Berlin Wall fell within hours. And Romania, I mean, it was, I think, less than 24 hours. The people revolted. The president was eliminated. You have this in history. You have an upswell of emotion that leads to something else. And I know Lebanon, things generally take time. Revolutions may take weeks or months, and reform may take decades. But all that said, do you think momentum matters?
Yeah.
We're now 2 weeks after, and where we're sitting right now, if you look outside, it's back to the way things were. The roadblocks are gone. Most of the protesters have gone home, not all. The highways have reopened. The Prime Minister submitted his resignation. Deep down, though, and I say this from my side, it doesn't feel like a revolution. It feels like maybe going back to 1989 and addressing a few things that weren't addressed properly. The difference between a temporary revolt, a shock, versus a revolution. That could bring in the state that you're describing.
So, from my perspective, this stuff just started. Maybe now we're, the term "the eye of a storm" comes to mind. The eye of the storm, but
And that
there's
we're in it now. Or we're
yeah,
in
of course.
Yeah.
I mean, we had one step in a direction, but there's many more steps to go. And I think the steps coming up are going to be more difficult, substantially more difficult than the steps that we just went through. Now, in terms of these examples you gave and the timeline of a revolution, this stuff, it makes me think of the story where, we joke around in the startup world that every overnight success takes an average of 7 years. These things that are short term, they're not actually short term. I mean, Zeina brought up earlier about 2011 and 2015 and then 2018 and all of these things building up. And so this is not a short term thing, and I think that we need to be ready for months. Now, as well, how this one organically started is very interesting and is so beautiful and is so healthy and positive in so many ways. But as well, it was tiring. The last 2 weeks have been tiring.
Sure.
And I think that it's fine to take a bit of a rest.
Yeah.
And for the many protesters are taking a bit of a rest. People are working a bit and they're getting paid at the end of the month, hopefully. And there's some sort of regrouping, thinking of what's next, and yes, we're giving the government a chance to show their next move, and people are I think very much prepared and understand that this is we haven't. I was even hesitant a bit when I saw on the news the celebrations last night.
Yeah.
And by the way, I think we have to have a shout out to Tripoli. Those people have the coolest fucking. Sorry. All right, now we're gonna have to scratch. All right, we have to give a shout out to Tripoli for having the coolest dang parties, and even the balloons.
I'm keeping the first version. I'll get flagged. I don't care. By the way, can we add, of the three of us, who's from Tripoli?
Okay, sure, yeah. The energy, the positivity, and then they bring out those red, white, and green balls to have the shape of the Lebanese flag that they're hovering over people's heads. And then the balloon thing, did you see this balloon that was filled with helium?
Yes.
They filled out and they released it, went up into the sky, saying Lebanon, hovering.
These are the images I think we will remember later, for sure.
So they're beautiful,
Yeah.
but we just have to really be aware that this was not the one step of 3. It's not like we're asking for 3 actions. This is the first step of 20.
Yeah.
Of 30. And let's celebrate this one. This was a great first step. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Brought people back together and energized and give people a break. But
can I push you just a little?
And the one thing as well that I think is so important to realize is even when the protests are done and whatever those demands happen in the next stages of the government and the next stages of these processes and next elections, is one of the most important things has to be this continued sense of civic engagement, not just of voting in the next election, but of organizing, of student groups being active on environmental, social, economic issues. We don't want the political parties to be in universities as they have been for so long, but students need to be organizing and active. Everybody needs to realize that their civic duty, their citizenship, is something that they have to exercise every week, not every couple years.
What would it take for us to think of Tripoli as a priority?
I don't know I don't know how representative we are on this.
Yeah.
I really have no idea. But we have both wanted to spend more time in Tripoli and do stuff in Tripoli, literally going back maybe 5 years or so. Zeina is about to launch a project there, and my family's from the north, not from Tripoli. But I've been wanting to do more. We've done small activities up there for a while, and there are so many, and by the way, we're talking about Tripoli, and we mentioned the parties in Tripoli, and there's beautiful stuff happening all over the country. So certainly not to discriminate against, what's been happening in Zu and Nabti and Jadadib and in the Bekaa and in Mount Lebanon, etc. There have been beautiful things all over the country. I think there's just something is special about Tripoli as sort of the second biggest city in the country, where there's so many people, where there's so many good opportunities, but it has been so neglected by the country, by the government for so long. And so I think that we all should be really supporting and celebrating and seeing the Tripoli as a sister city of Beirut, and the others as well. There's been too much centralization. Again, not to discriminate against others.
But would you equally put the same kind of expectation on Nabti? Would you be able to now think of Nabti as one and the same? And I'm asking because I'm part of this. I think I'm part of this psychological barrier. I'm from Tripoli, and I'm in Beirut. I'm in the same part of Beirut that you're in. We're all in the same little world here. I think of Tripoli still as, even though it was beautiful what happened, it's still not where I would immediately think of as, now that I'm going to base my life in Tripoli.
Actually, had the protests not happened and life had continued as usual, yesterday we would have launched our coding boot camp in Tripoli.
So this
And
goes to show you were...
Yeah, we had plans to do that.
Yes.
We've been active in Tripoli for a bit of time. This was our next go-to location.
Yeah.
And our third location was Nabati.
Oh, wow.
It's so interesting that
Wow.
our eyes are, I feel like, on locations where there's so much potential and so much appetite and so much hunger for these resources and opportunities.
So these projects were meant to happen around this
So
time?
Tripoli was supposed to happen yesterday.
Wow.
Obviously, we're going to meet again as a team Friday in 2 days to discuss how to move forward. But we have everything in place to launch. We just need to make sure that the situation is stable. Nabati, we have discussions happening to launch hopefully next year.
But you said you're not... I didn't want to quote you wrong. You said that you guys are...
We're not representative.
Not representative, meaning that most NGOs in Beirut do not want to...
Not necessarily NGOs. I think
no,
more like individuals.
Oh, individuals,
I just don't know. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who are talking about, and there are more tours, and there are more people going there. I just don't have enough sort of data to speak, to sort of voice what I think is a sort of norm or standard.
But I honestly do feel that this movement has definitely united the Lebanese in that way. Like they look at Tripoli differently now. They look at Nabati and Sur differently now. There's like this connection. There's this mutual love and kindred spirit that's been created. Like we think of images of the معركة in Nabati and Sur that we just, تحية للشباب والصبايا من الجنوب that have put up with so much. Like we want to go, we want to meet them, we want to see what they've been up to. How can we support each other? This has created beautiful links across the country. Again, we've been fragmented all this time. We felt that we have nothing in common, but no, there's so much in common. And the fact that, Tripoli, let's see how things go, but I've known over the past several months there's been a haraki happening in Tripoli. There's been movement. There's been initiatives, beautiful initiatives that have been born. And I think now as well, maybe we'll see more of it in other parts of the country, especially in the south and in the Bekaa. We're all connected now, so you can only imagine the ideas that are being transferred and the connections that are being made and the organizations and initiatives that are going to pop up that are going to transform those societies.
Yeah. This does feel like our Berlin Wall is falling. Whether or not it fell, it's too soon. And that's why I just want to get one step further. We saw the first step. It's a big accomplishment. The Prime Minister said so himself. He felt the pain of the people. It took him maybe longer than we hoped for, but he resigned. Just in a simple way, what would be the next step? Because you're pointing at what is in essence reform. and you want political parties out of the campus, and you want a new type of citizenry. But what would be the next step? Now that the Prime Minister officially submitted his resignation, what would you like to see next?
We actually just attended a session. We started this initiative, a group of friends and I. It's called Badna Nsur, Badna Narif, because we realized that there are many issues and topics that are being discussed around us that we don't know enough about. So we decided, let's get experts to the protest sites and invite everyone to come and discuss these issues. And today's topic obviously was the government resigned, what's next?
Yeah, because it's an important question.
Exactly, we are all lost. We don't know what
And
happens.
I think this is day one. I mean, we went through 14 days of revolt, but this is day one of the aftermath.
This is phase two. This is phase two.
So what was the consensus in
He
those?
was talking about different possibilities of what might happen. One could be a technocratic government, but they're actually politically aligned, so they're not actually neutral. Another one, he said, could be like a military takeover, which is what Lebanon does not need. Another one was actually something that we want, but that's like very, very difficult.
Which is what?
Which is having an independent technocratic government.
Yes.
And what I understood as well was that this is the hardest to get. Like, there are other options that are more likely to happen. We need to be very careful.
Yeah.
And this is where you're asking if the protest movement has died. It has not. The pulse is very much alive in all of us.
Yes.
As Munir said, we're taking a break, and we are, all eyes are ears are on what the government does next. The ball is in their court. They do not have the luxury of time, in my opinion, they do not have the luxury of time to wait because of this economic crisis. So this is the pressure that's on them. We might not need to be out on the streets to remind them that the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
You know, they need to act very fast. The EU is telling them, the US is telling them, everyone's telling them you need to form a government very, very soon.
I like the difference, the terminology that the protests have died, but the pulse has gone up.
Absolutely. We are all not under any illusion that this is a victory to celebrate.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned today is that even if an independent technocratic government is formed, that's not enough, because we need to make sure that they are given the power to pass the electoral reform law. So if they do not pass this law, if the government is not given the power to pass this law, we have to go back to the streets, because we are counting on not just an independent technocratic government, we are counting on new early elections, but it has to be based on a new fair electoral law. So this is just the beginning of all of this. This is going to be very difficult, because Parliament will not accept otherwise. If they're not given that ability, the government, Parliament will not pass such a law. If they're not given that power, then we need to go to Parliament and potentially identify certain members of Parliament to lobby intensively and heavily to vote for the new electoral law.
So Munir mentioned potential 20 steps, and you're now, in a way, you're...
I'm listing a few of them.
And you also pointed at what is a needed step 2. If that independent technocratic cabinet is not formed, do you think people will go back and say, okay, we got the Prime Minister resign, now we need to get the independent technocratic government in place? Is that something that you see where, if the pulse is high enough, protests will come back and that people will experience the same momentum?
I hope so.
I hope so too, because that to me would mean the beginning of
I'm more optimistic than you folks. I think 100% people will come back.
Yeah.
And even to clarify, I said that I think people are taking a break, not from the movement, not from the protests in terms of what is happening in the country. They're taking a break, meaning that they are going to get some rest at home, they're going to catch up on some sleep, they're going to, do some laundry, they're going to do some of this sort of, we were concerned and we started hearing people's voices go hoarse and people weren't sleeping well or whatever. This is a marathon and a sprint. Yeah. And so people need to be taking care of themselves. We need to be taking better care of each other, and people need to be taking care of themselves. So I think that people are still very much on and are not going to let things sort of flit away or let the demands dissolve. I think on top of that as well, we have to think about there's still so many needs in the country and all across the country, and we have this very, I think, underappreciated group of people in the diaspora from all around the country who have gone abroad and done such wonderful things abroad, and too often under this former / still current system, the expectation was often around the diaspora as just sending money back.
Yeah.
And I think we need to think much more openly, creatively, dynamically about how we engage the diaspora in bringing
they
ideas.
protested too.
Oh,
it wasn't
for
just
sure.
Tripoli or Dahi or Nabati.
Yes.
I mean, Paris was alive. Lebanese made it, that way,
Yeah.
and New York and all over the world. Yeah, the Lebanese were there for us too.
So how can we engage them in being involved in these communities and bringing some of these ideas? And again, part of this, to be honest, comes back to this idea of culture. And I know myself and various other people who did grow up abroad, then wanted to come back.
Yes.
But in as much as we want to celebrate what diaspora Lebanese have done abroad, and creativity and business and academia and innovation, etc., is very often when they come back here, they're only sort of their other ideas are only sort of lukewarmly accepted, and I think we need to accept them and enjoy and learn from them. We don't have to accept them at face value, but at least think that what they can bring back, and these different ideas and these bizarre ideas and things that are just, that we're just not accustomed to here, might actually have some value and merit. We don't need politicians. We need civil servants. We need people who see, public duty, public servants as working to do their best to serve the good of the country and the good of the people. And that part, I think, is beautiful. And that, by the way, is not just a conversation happening in Lebanon. That is also a conversation happening around the world, not just because governments around the world are moving so slow and because corruption and other bureaucratic and problematic issues are issues all over. In general, this has been a problem for decades in many places. But as well, that's exacerbated by how fast the world is moving, in my mind, with these two massive tidal wave trends of climate change and technology that's changing everything in our lives. And if the governments do not adapt, then the people who live within those systems will have a very difficult time. And then this whole aspect of, if government is always based on election of 2 years, 2, 3, 4 years, and then politicians are always incentivized to be thinking 2, 3, 4 years. But we need our government and the Ministry of Education, for example, to be thinking the kids that are entering kindergarten, they're going to graduate in 20 years into a world that is so different than the world today. We need those people to be thinking 15, 20 years into the future, and we're not having that. So how can we change the discussion of the people and the government to be more productive in that way?
And in your personal capacity, you see your role more in the reform process itself, as opposed to politics as we know it, if I got that right. That the process, getting there, is your immediate focus, and in contributing to the process.
My profession has been mainly on youth development, helping underprivileged youth, low-income youth, develop the skills they need in order to strengthen their livelihoods and be building better futures. I really think, for now, I would like to continue down that road, because obviously a large reason that these protests have happened is because so many youth have been marginalized, they're frustrated, they're depressed, they're in debt, they can't find anything fulfilling in their lives, they go towards drugs and violence and extremism and suicide. I mean, these young men that we witnessed yesterday, it's because of absolute frustration. They're taking their anger out on the wrong people.
Yes.
You know, so I really, really want, as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, I want to think now, like, how can Nawaya work more towards these youth in these communities? And I've tried actually over the past year and a half to get involved in Khanda El Ghamid.
And it's important
right
to say
next
this is where we are.
We're at Beirut Digital District right now,
Yeah.
right next to Khanda El Ghamid. It's been very difficult to get in touch with youth from the neighborhood and to encourage them to join our entrepreneurship training program, which is meant to help underprivileged youth develop small micro enterprises to help generate income. Now that I've made connections with people from this protest movement, I'm going to try again. I want to build on this and think, how can we create more of a dialogue between people from different backgrounds to really help build towards this vision of a unified Lebanon where you don't have people from other backgrounds coming in and destroying something that they should actually be supporting.
I don't think politics in its usual sense here is for me either. But I also think that the reason we shy away from it is because we've only experienced poor politics in Lebanon. And maybe our kids will have a different impression of what it means to be politically active, at least in the state. So maybe that's for the next generation. It's very important, this location here. Beirut Digital District, I mean, the neighborhood has changed and it hasn't changed. And I think the same way Beirut has changed and hasn't changed. 10 years ago, even longer, I used to bring the tour here to show what downtown looked like without Solidaire. And Bashura, Khanda, I mean, a lot of the original buildings were still here and they were haunting. And some of them were drug dens. And there was, Civil War graffiti inside. It was a scarred part of Beirut, and it was important to show it on the tour. But it was also at times, frightening experience. And there's this Syriac Catholic church just down the street as well. We used to walk in. Trees inside. I mean, it's the Green Line frozen. Now it's Urbanista. It's Beirut Digital District. AUB has a building here as well. But one block over, and it's still the same.
Yeah, I think that it's surprising, or maybe it shouldn't be so surprising, but it's shocking, shall we say, that some of that is so near to downtown, but also is even in downtown.
Yes.
And one of the beautiful things that happened in the protests, and also sad things, but the opening of the egg to public activities, public spaces, public events, and the opening of the Grand Theater to people, and condolences as well to the family who had a loss when someone fell there. But these are public places, public assets, public cultural spaces that have been withheld from the people, that have been deprived from the people for so long.
Is it the first time you go into the theater, the Grand Theater?
It was the first time I went to
For
the
me
downtown
too,
theater.
first time. The egg, we know it because of years before, but yeah.
And even the downtown as a whole has been largely deprived from most of the people, most of the Lebanese people for the last decades. And so I think that this aspect of saying that growth only counts as an improvement if it is inclusive growth is very important to keep in mind, and to see how we measure the success of this country in our evolution, in our society, in our communities, by how is the bottom 10% living and able to have opportunities. And when that happens, then we won't have these divisions anymore. We can still have the political debates, fantastic. We can still talk about so many different things and disagree on them, but it should not be based on this basic aspect of access to basic education and opportunities and healthcare and pension and basic livelihoods.
Munir Nabti, Zeina Saab, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you so much, and good luck to all of us here in the country. Regardless of the way politics play out over the coming months, coming years,
irrespective of any regime change, NGOs will continue to play a central role in helping heal Lebanon's economic wounds and bringing Lebanese together. On the ground, grassroots activity, the multitude of NGOs in Beirut and throughout the country deserve credit and applause. If you want to stay updated with upcoming episodes, simply subscribe to your preferred podcast platform or go to our YouTube channel. You'll find us there. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.